Hi, this is Joe Elsasser, President and founder of Covisum and also a practicing financial advisor, and welcome to another FinPlan Friday. Today's topic is actually based on a user question, actually a lot of user questions, and that is, why is it that Income Insight uses asset classes instead of the actual historical returns of different securities that might be in a client's portfolio? And the answer is because it is highly unlikely that those stocks or asset classes that have dramatically outperformed throughout history will continue to do so indefinitely. A good example here in Omaha, everybody knows Berkshire Hathaway. And Berkshire Hathaway over the last 30 years has done incredibly well relative to pretty much all of its peers. But at the same time, can we expect, and do we want to project, that the next 30 years for Berk will look like the last 30 years? Is that a fair thing to assume throughout the course of a client's retirement? And it's an important question because we're making decisions now based on how accounts are likely to change over time. And of course, we're going to update that every year and check to see if we're on track. But those projections should be grounded in reality. And if they are, the outcomes that are actually realized are likely to be considerably better than if we were to use historical returns. So rather than using individual security returns, we instead use asset class returns. So we group individual securities together based on a factor model and ultimately roll them up to an asset class. Now that asset class has defined return characteristics associated with it. So for example, what percentage return would we expect from capital gain? What percentage return would we expect from dividends? What percentage return would we expect from ordinary income? And also, what kind of turnover should we expect in a given year? So for example, a 20% turnover would be used for a mutual fund that typically turns over about 20% of its holdings throughout the course of the year. Now, why is a turnover statistic relevant? Well, because that means that the capital gains that are accumulating inside the fund are actually being distributed to holders. So that's where the turnover statistic actually comes into play. So those are the four stats that are associated with an asset class. The same four stats are also created for a down market. So for example, one of the stress tests in Income Insight is my plan still on track if I get a down market in my first year of retirement? Now, for an individual user of Income Insight who only uses Income Insight, we'll use those asset class statistics. However, for an individual for an advisor who uses both Income Insight and SmartRisk, we'll actually use the down market stats for the individual tickers. And the reason we'll do that is that's a statistical measure that creates a heavy-tailed distribution of potential returns and says, what does bad look like? Now that's most likely a better representation of actual risk than using asset class risk. And so that's why we use the specific ticker risk to handle the down market return. Now ultimately, asset classes are built up into portfolios, and portfolios are projected out through the course of a retirement. And that's how we arrive at our modeling. Now, the reason that's so important is we're making decisions based on the idea of whether a reallocation, for example, maybe I'm going to put my more aggressive holdings in my Roth and put my bonds in my IRA, just because, a combination of reasons. I'm likely to spend from my IRA before I'm likely to spend from my Roth, and I want the highest growth items in my Roth because all that growth is going to be tax-free. Now, if I don't have reasonable asset class statistics, then those kinds of projections are going to be much less effective. Now, as an advisor, you can either use our defaults, which are pre-built, or you can set up your own asset class statistics within the system, and you'll just define those four characteristics for each asset class you set up. What is the return due to capital gain? What's the return due to ordinary income? What's the return due to qualified dividends? And what is the turnover for that particular asset class? Now you can define an unlimited number of asset classes, and you can even define fixed asset classes to represent things like CDs or fixed annuities. Now, Administrators of institutions also have the ability. So if you're an enterprise customer and you have your own capital market assumptions, we can accommodate those. You can make either those and advisor-driven assumptions available to your advisors, or you can require that your advisors only use your capital market assumptions, whichever works best for you. So thank you so much for joining us for another FinPlan Friday, and we look forward to seeing you next month.